Welcome everybody to our online event. Today we're going to be talking about a really important topic. So how to make the change from going headless on your e-commerce monolith. So today we're going to be talking specifically about Salesforce Commerce Cloud. But first, some introductions. So I'm here with the experts. Today we're joined by Eric Gregorian. He's the manager of front-end platforms at ASICS. And Dan Lawhorn, he was previously the lead software engineer at Maiden, now a senior sales engineer at Vercel, working with some of our top e-commerce customers. And I'm Alina Weinstein, a solutions product marketer, and I will be moderating the session today. So let's dive in. Today we're going to cover ASICS migration from their Salesforce Commerce Cloud monolith to Salesforce Commerce Cloud on the back end and Vercel on the front end, why they chose Next.js and Vercel, what migrating unlocked for the team and the gains that they were able to see because of the migration, decisions on how they did that and why they chose to migrate, why Vercel for e-commerce, and then at the end, I'll leave some time for a live Q&A. So this is your time to ask any questions that you have for the experts. So please use the Q&A function so we can make sure we get to them. But first, I want to talk about what we're talking about today. So a survey by Commerce Tools found that 85% of enterprise retailers have shifted to a microservices-based architecture to optimize digital performance. And this shift is made possible by incremental migration, enabling retailers to modernize at their own pace while experiencing immediate performance gains and greater front-end flexibility. And I think that sets the stage perfectly for what we want to cover today, which is why it's so important to start taking those incremental steps towards modernization. But a little refresh on monolithic versus headless. So what we're talking about is the difference between a closed and an open architecture. So in general, monoliths are great for getting started because they have everything you need in one place. But as you grow and add more products and services, it starts to become a data problem and a performance problem and ultimately a flexibility problem. And for large retailers that have a ton of data, products, and services that they need to manage, they start to become really weighed down by the inflexibility of it all. And there's a few key reasons why e-commerce teams outgrow these monolithic architectures, which is architectural constraints. So teams are forced to implement personalization client side, leading to duplicate downloads and slower page loads. Limited tooling choices and tech stack limitations. Being locked into a specific tech stack can really limit your ability to choose the best in breed tooling, and scalability struggles. So during these peak traffic events like Black Friday, Cyber Monday, you have issues like bloated tag managers, inefficient data pipelines, and unoptimized assets, which make Salesforce Commerce Cloud sites really prone to these types of slowdowns or downtime. And then also limited flexibility. So waiting on Salesforce Commerce Cloud for software updates or being forced to adhere to their roadmap for critical features. So what we see is that when businesses start reaching the limits of their architecture, they start decoupling the front end from their back end. And by going headless on Salesforce Commerce Cloud, you get to leverage the strengths of both systems, where Salesforce Commerce Cloud continues to handle complex e-commerce logic, inventory management, and back-end processes. And then Next.js provides a really fast, modern front end with an improved developer experience and performance. And then when you pair that with Vercel, you have global distribution and scaling of your front end built in. So I would love to open it up to a poll question from the audience. Are you on a monolith? And while those results are coming in, I want to open it up to Eric. So Eric, what are some of the challenges that you have as a developer at an e-commerce company? What are some of the main things that really frustrate you?
I think a lot of what we have, and I imagine this is the same across the board, is we need to get stuff out fast. So enabling our content creators to do that in terms of whether it be promotional banners, homepage updates, etc., we need all of that to go out as quickly as possible. And then on the other end of that, we need to constantly evaluate the systems that we're using to ensure that they are the best in breed tool that we need at that moment in time. So when we go with something that's a bit more headless, we're able to take all of that and piece it together, like you just said, so that we are enabling our business users to do exactly what they want without developers getting in the way. And on the other end, making sure that developers are able to essentially free up their time and build those solutions so that content creators are able to get their stuff out quickly.
Yeah, and what are some of the key considerations that e-commerce developers really need to be thinking about?
I think, again, going back to the same point, it's flexibility. So you need to be able to bring in new tooling or remove old tooling that didn't scale with you or just isn't the best solution at this point, so that you do have that flexibility to move on and do bigger things. There's so many competitors in every aspect of e-commerce that you need to be one step ahead of that competition. So with that flexibility, bringing in the ability for developers to just build and ship stuff so that the rest of your business can then use that to push stuff out quicker. Um, and then along with that, you want to make sure that you have that cohesive brand experience that every property on your site is able to use. So in this case, you're able to create a design system that developers are able to consistently use and designers are able to consistently contribute to, so that no matter if it's a one-off experience or the same thing that you're building in a different way, your brand looks the same and users know exactly where they are. Um,
What about site speed? Can you talk a little bit about how that's important?
I mean, that's a huge point for anyone, really, I guess. I know there's a lot of stats that have been floated around about every millisecond, 100 milliseconds, second, whatever it is, um, making drastic changes to your conversion rates. So obviously, we're always looking to improve that and make sure that when a user wants content, it's available as quickly as possible. And being able to do that with Vercel is definitely great with server-side rendering, incremental rendering, all of that.
Definitely. And yes, you are referring to the Deloitte study, and they did a study on how improvements in mobile site speed positively affect a brand's bottom line. And what they found was that with a 1 millisecond improvement in site speed, retail consumers spent almost 10% more. So, in other words, milliseconds directly translate into millions of dollars. So I do want to talk about why ASICS decided to go headless initially, and what was that moment of inspiration? What were you talking about? What were the issues?
A lot of it was we wanted to enable that flexibility for all of our regions. So being able to get content out quickly. I mean, 20 something locales that we support. So making sure that regions have that ability to create that content and push it out. And making sure that developers don't have to spend all of that time then importing localized content or creating that content themselves. So a lot of bringing in a new CMS that we tied into Vercel to enable those regions, but then also making sure that we are able to support this, which is really the scary part. We're using Next.js and Salesforce. I mean, it's two essentially different platforms. But how do we get these two to work together? So we did some trickery along with some help with the Vercel folks and made it work. And then, yeah, overall, just a new tech stack and infrastructure is always a daunting task. So making sure that we're able to manage this correctly so that it does work and it does scale in the future as we put more and more on top of it.
Yeah. Dan, I would love to hear from you as an engineer at Maiden. What were some of the problems that your team was running into on a monolith? And why is being on a monolith so hard for a development team?
Yeah, you know, at Maiden, we were a startup and we really, core to our identity is we wanted to have a lot of control over our own destiny. You know, we were a yes team, not a no team, or at least that's what we saw ourselves as. So with a monolithic architecture, the things it does well, it tends to do really great. It's when you find yourself in those moments where you're coloring a little outside the lines that things get really challenging. that suddenly you have to either kind of break a thing or make a thing behave the way it wasn't originally supposed to, or you actually end up kind of bringing in these outside tools that really kind of make you no longer much of a monolith. You're using a third party to serve up your landing pages. You have, a third party provider here, a third party provider there. They don't speak exactly the same language. Suddenly, you do have this kind of sprawl of things. It's no longer this one thing that you had in front of you. Um, and so those take, forms of a lot of different things. And it's a lot of things that we see with our different e-commerce customers as well. Just you want to do a little something different with the URL. Shopify and SFCC aren't necessarily the most permissive when it comes to like how are you going to route these things. What can I do behind the scenes between the user's request and the page loading? I want to have a little bit more control over that. Do things like A/B experimenting or some rerouting or some authentication. You're really kind of boxed in a little bit if you're building completely on the monolith. So, for us, the decision was we wanted to get to a yes for every question, even if it was a very tough yes. Even if we didn't act on that yes, we wanted to be able to say that we could do this. And that was really the big driver of our decision to go headless.
Yeah, I love that. Those are all super good points. Getting to a place where, you are you're starting to hit the limits of what your monolith can provide. And so then taking control of the little levers that you can pull in every part of your online store. So Eric, I would love to hear from you about your top priorities in navigating the change. What were some of the success metrics, and how did you talk about that as a team?
So there were two real big priorities. One was the flexibility, and two was making sure that we kept the look and feel while still being able to iterate on what we had built so far, moving into the future. So the flexibility of being able to change vendors on the fly is definitely a huge one. For now, our CMS works, and I think it will work, but let's say worst case scenario, it stopped working for what we're trying to do. Well, it makes it a lot easier for us to swap out. Um, at some point, we're only changing the data contract in terms of how our backend is servicing it to our front end, as long as that is how the connection is being made. But otherwise, the front end doesn't really have to do much work other than minor tweaks, as there's obviously going to be some changes. Um, the other part is allowing product and dev to just create those flexible solutions for the business to just take and run with. So creating different content components that the business can use to create different experiences. A few really interesting ones that we've seen were now an infinite homepage almost, where we just had many content slots of promotional content. Um, and then on the other end, there's obviously the leadership buy-in side of things. Um, so making sure that we do keep that uniform look and feel or make it even more uniform. Um, things like font sizes, colors, logos, all of that stuff, where the branding really just needs to say that we are ASICS. Um, and that way we're able to build that cohesive experience so that even if it is a one-off page for whatever event that we're trying to host, we're able to still do that. And it's not anything outside of the box. And then finally, the increased migration velocity is definitely a huge one. There's definitely a fear of we're going to switch these platforms and it's going to slow us down. And at least initially, that is very much true. But I think once you do make that switch and you create more and more content over time and your devs create the tooling to enable that content, you're able to create this flywheel effect of more of future stuff being released being a lot faster because now you have those foundational elements and infrastructure. So things like typography, and now let's say you have a banner, well, that banner can now be used anywhere else on the site, so you don't have to create it again. So that's where the monolith kind of starts to go away, and the component structure of Next.js and Vercel really comes into play.
I love that. So, it sounds like talking about removing bottlenecks, enabling your developers, and also removing the reliance on developers, and then reusing these components for future investment. Same question for Dan. I would love to hear about, for folks in the audience who are thinking about approaching a migration, how do you think about taking the steps to prove it out to your leadership team, and what advice do you have for them?
I think the best advice that I can give is, and it's a mantra here we have at Vercel, which really is seeing as believing. Um, for us, a lot of what was able to work, headless, especially at the time, this was 2021, was still a pretty new field. Still sounded, very different. And even if you kind of mentally understood it in a conversation, it's a very different thing to actually know that as a website. The best thing I think you can do is get a website in somebody's hand. And I think that's applicable outside of e-commerce too, but especially to understand, those concepts, like getting somebody a URL, letting them explore that on their own, letting them explore that with you, collaborate, really feel it and get tactility. That's going to be always, I think, the most powerful thing when it comes to shipping a feature. And that for us is why Vercel made so much sense. The fact that we could just push to a Git branch and get that infrastructure built up, that we could really quickly, we could build big features or we could build really small things. We could correct on the fly. We could just change. It really was, we were in control of our own destiny with that. And I think that's the quickest way to build consensus, is to show somebody, what's there. And I think that kind of applies for creating, going headless, going composable is a bit of a cultural change. Going from the monolith isn't just a technical stack. It is a different way of approaching things. There are going to be some things that, the platform just kind of handled that now are in engineering's hands. And Eric mentioned sometimes there's upfront cost with that. And that sounds like it's going to be slower. That sounds like it's going to be more resource intensive, but you're actually doing things that are going to be enabling your stakeholders to not talk to engineering. And I think that is where you really see the eyes light up of your stakeholders, when your merchandising team, when your marketing team, when your performance ads team can be building and iterating on the stack without having to talk to an engineer, without having to tap on the shoulder of an SRE, without having to bring DevOps into your conversations and your sprints to kind of show you, what things need to exist. You have now built a stack that empowers the people who want to use it. And that's really cool. And that gives you a lot of power when you're talking about this to say, why don't I stop talking to you about it? Why don't I show you?
I love that. And when we were talking about this earlier, you were sharing some anecdotes from your time at Maiden about how, your CEO, your team would say, I think we should build this feature. And then, within what, minutes it was done. Okay, maybe not minutes, but
I mean, really kind of depends on what the ask is. Sometimes you find yourself in a classic situation where you had something a little bit hard coded into your footer and it didn't look quite correct. Say you're one of those companies that said copyright 2024, it's 2025. You didn't have kind of an automated update. That would be a horrible thing to go through a full DevOps provisioning cycle for. But if you can go in there, you can set the, bug fix branch, update the year, put that in front of your QA people, and that ships. You could have something a little bit more fun, like we added a new marketing section that we kind of hard coded in. In 45 minutes, the CEO has seen that, he's commented on it, it's gone through QA, it ships. I know I hear the PMs and the EMs freaking out about the idea that the CEO can see what you're doing. So it's not the project management approach I would suggest to everybody. But as a small team, as a low hierarchy team, if that's something that you do have that buy-in from the executive suite and they really want to get their hands dirty, it is a really powerful thing for them to be able to feel like they're experiencing that and get that buy-in.
And I think that's an experience that everybody can relate to, because at the end of the day, what we're talking about is coming up with these ideas and then being able to implement on them really quickly. So, Eric, I would love to hear, why did you choose Next.js and Vercel?
So I think there's a lot here. One of the biggest things was we wanted to keep using React. But on an e-commerce site, we also want to make sure that speed is there, and client-side rendered React just it doesn't have that. It's fast, but there's the SEO implications because we have every search engine crawling just about every page on the site. So we need all of that content to be available as quick as possible. So using React with Next.js and Vercel, it made sense. Next.js is built by Vercel. So that very firm tie-in between the two definitely helps in terms of being able to ship stuff quickly and making sure that we are using the best-in-class tool for the framework that we've chosen. Also, the fact that we do have React engineers, so it's easier for them to think a little differently in terms of how they're going to build something because there obviously are differences, but still, for the most part, being able to take most of the knowledge that they have and use it moving forward. The other part is flexibility. So we're able to basically build whatever we want, however we want, because we've already done that with everything else. But also making sure that we're building it in a way that it is usable in the future. So it's not much different from how React works as of today. We have all of our components. It provides that flexibility of using the same thing over and over again. But also turning around and having a variation of something doesn't really change. And then finally bringing in caching. A lot of that is, again, going back to site speed, where we want to make sure things are available as quickly as possible. So in our case, with what we've migrated so far, it's a lot of static content or content that may update at some point in the future. And that's where we want to make sure that we're not making unnecessary calls to our CMS to incur extra bandwidth costs, but also ensuring that with this caching, content is more readily available the second it's needed. In the case of things like blog posts, where those can be updated with new locales as translations come in, we end up in a case where ISR gets used. So there is that first user penalty, but it's really just that one user, after which point it's cached for a decently long time. So I'd say that's really the biggest reasons why we chose Next.js and Vercel is the flexibility, the existing React bench that we have, and definitely the site speed.
Yeah, and those are really good points. And I want to hear also about your developer experience on Vercel and what makes that so good for ASICS too.
The two biggest things are the deployment pipeline. So we don't need to involve SRE or DevOps in any way. I think at this point, most of our developers have probably stood up some sort of preview deploy or updated a deploy in some way. And it's all very much just clicking through a few prompts, pushing up some new code and making sure that Vercel is correctly tied into GitHub. And then after that, everything just kind of works. There's preview links to share around as new stuff is released. So it really just allows devs to ship. And then if you do have a release team or anything like that, they can jump in and very much take everything from that preview deploy and move it forward to production, because obviously at some point you do need QA and stakeholder buy-in to get something out the door. So really, it becomes a more hands-off experience for the developer to just ship code and then leave everything else to everyone else, and kind of really separates those concerns in terms of who does what and when it's available for them to view.
Yeah, I love that you said that devs can just ship, because something that we've been saying a lot at Vercel is you can just ship. And what we really mean is that we're removing the blockers from being able to get your work done and being able to get stuff out the door. So it's great to hear that you have the developer experience to literally do that. But I'd love to hear from you, Dan. What about some of the challenges that you experienced at Maiden? What you were trying to do, and what was better about the experience because you had Vercel.
Absolutely. I think kind of talking about that flexibility, talking about you can just ship things. I think that's, the really cool thing, kind of going back to that quick kind of timeline, is you don't have to wait, for that classic kind of 2-week sprint and then, week of QA, and then a thing goes out. You wrote some code 3 weeks ago, you wait for it to ship. Maybe the feature works, maybe it doesn't. Um, no one likes to fail, but me personally, when I do like to fail, I like to fail fast. And so when a thing goes out, I'd like to know like immediately, like I like the feedback, and that feedback helps us, rapid feedback helps us build the next thing faster. Rapid feedback, and if a thing hits, that's just a couple of weeks earlier where we've improved our conversion rate possibly, or we've improved our core web vitals, which have led to an improvement in conversion rate. We don't have to wait. We're not sitting around collecting dust in dev as much as possible. And with the Vercel architecture, there's also the fact that we are getting that spun up architecture every time we push out our code also gives us the security to know that if somehow we regressed, if something, we missed, there's that deployment right back there that we can instantly roll into without, again, needing to pull in a DevOps resource. So by moving with that velocity, like we actually are developing security for ourselves as well. It just gives us really strong control over that velocity. It lets us be not reckless, but also quick. And that really kind of fits, I think, with a lot of what a modern like e-commerce stack is looking for. There are these kind of hundreds of oftentimes really contradictory requests coming in from various stakeholders. Things need to be fast, but they also need to be dynamic, but they need to be stable. We were just able to kind of address all those at the level that they were at, and it was just sensibly really quick. Um, One I think thing happens as we talk about, wanting to have velocity, like, we believed in milliseconds make millions as well. Is the challenge that sometimes when you think too much about it, you end up kind of teaching the test. You end up trying to do all these things to make things really fast, and sometimes those can be user hostile. Sometimes they aren't necessarily great architectural decisions. We were able to have a site that was just sensibly really quick, that worked for us, that delivered on personalization, that delivered on A/B experimentation, while not having to make, these big choices of, leaving stuff out for the user just for it to be quick. So we were able to kind of do that all. And we were a very yes culture. And that's always, I think, really cool when we're working with other e-commerce companies. Like we love talking to people when they're able to like get really hyped about what they're able to build. Like that's really infectious. And that's really cool. And that spreads out from engineering. Like people who work adjacent to sites that go on Vercel tend to get really hyped as well. And that's really great.
Well, I think both of your experiences, are in line with the idea that it's exciting to be able to ship. And when devs are able to ship, then they are happier. And I think both of those experiences are really in line with what we saw externally when we commissioned an outside study by Forrester Consulting. So the 2024 TEI impact of Vercel evaluated the potential return on investment that enterprises may realize by replatforming to Vercel. And what they found was that with Vercel, devs spend 90% less time managing front-end infrastructure and 80% less on code deployment. And because Vercel simplifies and automates infrastructure-related tasks, website performance improves by 90%, and that has positive impacts on increased customer conversion rates and higher ROI. Also, another stat that I wanted to share from a customer within the report too is that the time to build and deploy code fell by 83%, so from 2 hours to 12 minutes. And another stat that I wanted to share too is that by switching to Vercel, the front-end team was able to improve core web vitals, SEO, and site uptime during high traffic periods. And more traffic at the top of the funnel translated into additional customers at the bottom of the funnel worth hundreds of millions of dollars of top-line revenue. So in line, with the Deloitte study on milliseconds make millions, we're also validating this from the TEI report. And I think all of this is really important to consider when you're making a longer term forward-looking investment into technology and frameworks, because even in ASICS decision to go with Next.js and Vercel, there were alternatives. So I want to talk about PWA Kit and what it is and why we chose to go with Next.js and Vercel. So PWA Kit is a React-based storefront framework within the Salesforce Commerce Cloud ecosystem. So Dan, I know you were coming from a different stack when you were at Maiden, but are there things that jump out to you about PWA Kit that would be challenging from a developer standpoint?
Yeah, I think some of the things that we've been talking about, it's not just Next.js versus PWA Kit. PWA Kit is really tied to SFCC and it's tied to the Salesforce ecosystem, which uh, does a lot of things really incredibly well. But is not known for being the most flexible thing in the world. Is not known for being the most agile developer experience in the world. And so, to be kind of like very tied in on that, to be tied into SFCC, just doesn't necessarily give us that flexibility that we have with Next.js, which is at the end of the day, a very agnostic experience as to what's going to be building. So, with PWA Kit, a lot of its ideas are built around this notion of e-commerce. Your site might be an e-commerce site, but there might be other things that it wants to do. Like you might want to have a lot of really rich media experiences. You might want to have a lot of different content stories that you have a lot of control over. And PWA Kit isn't necessarily going to give you that. Um, and the way it's kind of architected leads to pretty large, server bundles, leads to kind of pretty kludgy code. It gets you React at the end of the day, but doesn't necessarily feel quite as glove on hand as Next.js always felt for me while I was developing. Truth be told, as mentioned, I was on Shopify with Next.js, so very similar idea that we were doing headless commerce. Um, you know, you can use SFCC in that exact same stack. As Eric mentioned, being able to switch up vendors is an amazing feature. But for us, yeah, it just didn't have PWA Kit wouldn't have been able to give us the flexibility that we needed to do what we were able to do with Next.js.
Yeah, and I think those are all super good points. I mean, what we're talking about is thinking through a long-term investment that gives you that open source flexibility. And so really thinking through, exactly what you're looking for in terms of frameworks and developer experience features. But you make a really good point too, in that we're talking about working with Salesforce Commerce Cloud and Vercel. We're better together. And so I wanted to highlight a customer example with Sonos. And they had a really similar story where they moved from Salesforce Commerce Cloud from a monolith to Salesforce Commerce Cloud on the back end and Vercel and Next.js on the front end. And they were initially experiencing really long build times. They didn't have the right developer experience tools to debug errors. They were also pulling from a limited talent pool of developers with very specific Salesforce Commerce Cloud expertise. And they made the switch to go headless on Salesforce Commerce Cloud and Vercel, and they saw a 10% increase in organic traffic. And ultimately, this quote here represents that they gained the freedom and the flexibility to build their brand the way that they wanted. So I wanted to pass it off to you, Dan, to talk a little bit about what is Vercel, and can we talk a little bit about the developer experience platform and the managed infrastructure, and then why specifically Vercel is such a good fit for retailers?
Yeah. So, when we talk about Vercel, we've been talking about Next.js a lot on this as well. And Next.js, our CEO was the founder, or Vercel's CEO is the founder of Next.js. It is a thing that, we contribute to, that we love. But a big, huge part of the story for us is the front end cloud that Vercel provides. We have the developer experience platform, which really enables kind of the collaboration, enables you to very rapidly kind of experience your site, keep tracks on or keep tabs on it, make sure that you are developing the best version of your site and that you can quickly ship. And then we have the managed infrastructure, the kind of thing we talked about where you don't have to go to DevOps. We auto scale, we auto provision, we deploy your site to over 100 points of presence throughout the globe. We have our built-in smart CDN. We have our built-in WAF. We do all the things that are the provisioning necessary. For us, when we were at Maiden, we were a cookware company. We were a digital experience being provided by our team. We didn't necessarily need to know, where and how that data was living. So for us, the managed infrastructure was critical, and the fact that it gave us 5 nines of uptime on Black Friday, Cyber Monday was a huge peace of mind for us to have a very boring, very exciting holiday season.
I love that. And so just really quickly, can you walk us through then? Let's dive a little bit deeper into why Vercel for retailers, specifically after, our Black Friday, Cyber Monday.
Yeah, absolutely. We have the scalability and the availability. We mentioned the infrastructure was incredible. It auto scaled, it deployed quickly around the globe with our front-end cloud. And we actually have features that just create an even better peace of mind. We mentioned we have function failover regions. If for any reason anything's happening in US East 1 and it's down, that's a bad day on the internet, but it doesn't have to be a bad day for you because we can automatically move over, to SFO, we can automatically move over to Cleveland, wherever you need, and we can also be running those functions in multi-zones. So as mentioned, we had the 5 9 plus a 2 of uptime at Cyber Monday this past season. We also offer the speed and personalization. We are or the way we handle caching for you, the way we handle our Edge middleware, the way we have Edge config that you can readily and quickly work on personalization, running A/B experimentation, all of these things that you can do. We have an infrastructure that is built from the ground up to support those ideas. And we're also secure by default. DDoS mitigation comes out of the box. We have our web application firewall. We have managed rules with OWASP, or you can bring the rules that you find, necessary. One that I always recommend writing out of the box is people who are trying to hit your WP login page, even though your website doesn't have a WP login page. Just write a simple rule for that. And gives you just a ton of peace of mind that that massive surge in traffic that you're getting, over the holiday season is the massive surge in traffic that you want. Yeah.
Well, I love that because I was talking to some of our customers after their Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and what they said was that Black Friday was really boring for them and that they were just watching the sales go up. And what we mean by that is just that that's an incredible way to describe an event that's historically very unpredictable and very stressful for a lot of companies. So to say that it's boring means that we're doing our job. So, Eric, I would love to talk to you about why migrating to Vercel was worth it and what it's unlocked for your team.
Sure. So we essentially allowed 4 regions to launch content asynchronously. We live between the US, Europe, Japan, and Australia. So all of our developers can't be online all the time. And being able to provide all of the tooling between our CMS to Vercel with ISR so that blog posts are going up when we're asleep over here. And then any new homepage updates, etc., all of it, we don't know when it happens almost. Sure, we know, but we don't really have to be there to babysit it. And then on the other end, it has improved our time for marketing to actually get stuff out when they want to get it out. We don't need to be involved. We simply provide all the tooling again, and they push out whatever updates they want to that homepage, or if the blog post needs to change for whatever reason, they can do that on their own right in the CMS, and it's live within the next 10 to 15 minutes. And then finally, just being able to empower teams overall who depend on engineering. So we're able to almost shift to more of a product cycle where engineering is building everything that is needed and then training those teams to use that infrastructure correctly. And we've seen this happen multiple times where engineering has built all sorts of things, and whoever we've trained has gone ahead and done things with it that we didn't even expect was maybe possible or doable or would even be a thought. So all sorts of promotional banners laid out in interesting ways to really highlight what the brand is trying to show rather than engineering prescribing you can only use this one thing in this one way, because that's what we're willing to build with all of the other work that we have in the pipeline.
So being able to launch in multiple regions, eliminating the reliance on devs and empowering other teams like marketing to be able to take those launches to market on their own. That's really similar to a lot of the challenges that a lot of e-commerce companies face when they're in multiple brands, they have multiple regions, multiple markets. And so definitely empowering to be able to do that, as that's something that really hits close to home. So I'd love for you to talk about your initial migration, how you decided to approach the problem, and what were your very first steps in thinking through this?
Yeah, I think this is the interesting part where some companies just say we're not going to do any new development on our existing tech stack, and we're just going to sit here for the next few months to a year, and migrate everything that we have. But I think there's also the other side of it where the business still needs to get stuff out. So how do you balance both sides of this? And that's more of the approach that we took, but also being conservative and careful to make sure that we're not breaking anything in the process. So our tech stack is a little more intricate because of it, as opposed to just lifting everything from one place and putting it on the next platform. We get a whole bunch of stuff from Vercel and Next.js, inject it into a Salesforce ISML template, and then finally surface that to the user, which should be slow technically, but with Vercel being so fast in Next.js and all of that content already being available, we're able to essentially be as fast as Salesforce can be in terms of actually turning that content around to the user. So what we started off with, just to make sure that we could get this intricate tech stack to work, is PLP content banners on pages where they already either existed or we wanted to add them. And the reason why this was a nice starting point was because if that content banner didn't appear, it didn't really impact the user. And no one knew any better anyways that there was going to be a content banner in there. So really the page would just shrink a little to accommodate for the space that was going to be other content. And from there, we realized that, yes, we can actually pull this off. So then we took the content banner approach and we expanded it to taking over a single content banner on the homepage, and then ultimately taking over the whole homepage. And then finally moving on to slightly more dynamic content in terms of blogs and customer service pages. So things like warranty forms and things like that, where the content possibly updates more frequently. So going back to things like localization, where translations may come in at different points in time and wanting to be able to surface that as quickly as possible, to blog posts just being written at different points in time as well, and making sure that the blog homepage updates to surface that correctly. And then on the other end, introducing more API-driven interfaces with customer service pages where we now need to upload imagery, submit forms, etc., and getting that to work. And we're now at a point where we're going even deeper into that, with our PLP being the next step of that migration. So tying it more into the data that we're getting from Salesforce and making sure that we can make the two work well together. And then from there, we'll move on to PDP, where that's a very large part of our site traffic. And then finally, checkout. Checkout definitely being the scary one that we want to make sure we definitely get right, because obviously that's what brings in the money, and you don't want to break the one thing that's actually keeping you in business.
So I love love that you're walking through this plan with us. Certainly a conservative plan, and there's so many ways to slice the problem. And I think a good point to say that no two migrations are made the same. I want to also share a different migration plan. This is actually what we did with Helly Hansen, and they actually started with their checkout. So Dan, can you talk a little bit about what this migration plan looks like and how you approach this problem?
Yeah, so they took a similar incremental approach that ASICS did, where they were going kind of vertical by vertical, moving forward. But instead of going kind of small to big, they decided they really wanted to validate quickly. So they went with kind of checkout first and then moved across. And then in the span of a 6-month migration, they've made the full stack move over to Vercel. So by starting with the biggest part, they validated down to content from there, but they wanted to absolutely make sure that that transactional portion was what's going to land, because without that, the migration didn't seem worth it for them.
And they saw incredible results. So can you talk about what they saw with their core web vitals after they made that migration?
Yeah. So you see these vitals moving across here. You can see where it started as the incremental migration over the first movement there, and you got some movement, as more pages were taken on, and then as it has moved, across the board, um, and now it's all on Vercel. All of those vitals have improved for them. And this has been a thing where they've still been really focused on moving the technology over and making sure it works. And this is great where it's just fast by default. This is allowing them to know that they're getting good core web vitals, that this is translating into just momentous year-over-year conversion rate growth. And that as this site has stabilized, that they've seen that they've de-risked that transition, they can now focus on getting these web vitals even better without having to risk overturning that architecture that they used.
Yeah, and this is pretty incredible to see because they went from all of their core web vitals to being in the red and yellow to now trending into the yellow and green. And that was just with that one optimization that they made. And, as we know, as retailers, that this is, you don't get perfection right away, and that it is a work in progress as you start to incrementally migrate parts of your site over. And so it's really incredible to see that just with this one change that they made, they were able to see those results. And so I think that that brings us to the end here, which is that when you think about breaking up these migrations, think about focusing on the problem at hand. And I think one way that you can really start to see those results is by partnering with experts to see a faster and more scalable platform. So people who have seen every migration under the sun and have walked through with customers on each specific migration and what's important to your technical considerations. And then I also think that investing in technology that supports a flexible and long-term growth strategy is one of the best ways to invest in your long-term decisions, because ultimately, closing yourself off and choosing technology that supports you in the short term might not be the best situation in the long term. And then looking ahead to 2025, making some of those small changes today can actually pay dividends for next Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and just in general in performance for the next year. And if you're looking for help, let Vercel's team of experts help you navigate your specific migration strategy. So I would love to throw it out to one last poll question. Would you be interested in a personalized demo of Vercel? Feel free to get those responses in, and we'll be in touch with you. And before I open it up to Q&A, I just wanted to flag that we'll be in New York next week at NRF. So Dan and I will be there. We'll be at the booth. He has a brand new e-commerce demo that we're going to be showing for the very first time. So we'd love to see you. And there's also a few other events that are happening. We have a wellness event for women in tech that's happening January 12th. We also have a penthouse party. So many opportunities for us to continue the conversation and see you in person. And with that, I would love to open it up to questions. So looking through the Q&A chat, Eric, this question is for you. So how many teams are working on the setup in parallel, and how do you structure teams?
As of right now, we have essentially two teams. One team that is really working on taking over as much of the site as possible. And then as we decide on other aspects, we spin up teams as needed. So we've been trying to keep it small just because we do have that React bench. And we're able to really test and make sure that things are working while also getting people up to speed on what the latest and greatest is that we're doing. So as of right now, I'd say 2 teams to really keep things running as well as one-off teams to get new things going.
Yeah, that's great. Eric, one more for you on the API side. Would you use OC API or SC API, and why?
So we're using Slash to interface with Salesforce at this point for the PLP because we have promotional stuff that we need to pull in for sales depending on user groups, etc. And there's a bit of back and forth that we're doing there just because our IDP is set up as a separate IDP and not through Salesforce. So just a few technical things that we need to work out there, but we are using Slash.
And I think folks are actually curious about your business users. So web producers, merchandisers, and during the migration period, was their workflow impacted?
Their workflow was impacted, but I think what was very interesting to see is I know with a lot of migrations that happen like this, there's a lot of um, pushback in terms of, well, my workflow is changing. I don't like this. I'm already used to doing things a certain way. But we really received the exact opposite of that, which was, this is great. I only have to deal with a CMS that is fairly easy to use. And then I can turn around and release that content as quickly as I can work on it without having to deal with developers.
Yeah, that's great. Dan, I would love to hear from you. I mean, I know that we talked a little bit about navigating cultural changes within an organization when it comes to moving towards a migration. But I'm curious, for folks that are running into challenges where there are teams that are not all aligned on a migration, what were the steps that you took to get everybody aligned, and what advice would you have for folks that are starting that process?
Yeah, absolutely. I think be a listener is definitely huge. You know, come I think when we've seen some less great headless migrations, which definitely exist out there in the world, they oftentimes came as headless was a solution in search of the problems. Um, for me, the key thing was always to center your empathy with the people who are going to be using this site and just make sure that what you're showing them is, you might have to show them a new workflow that's going to work in this thing. Like you might have to invent the new workflow like Eric was talking about. It might disrupt what they're doing, but disrupt at the behest of what their goal is. Find out what their pain is and what they're implicating to you, and really kind of run with that. And I think you're always going to be able, you're not going to be able to win every battle. But it definitely helps if you know that you're always centering the needs of the people who are coming to you, with those challenges. And then also, yeah, like part of we talked about the contrast between Next and PWA is Next is really widely adopted. It is a really robust world out there. Like you can kind of come up with really good battle tested solutions out in production. So you can build with confidence knowing that there are other people out there, doing this. Like you aren't completely inventing the wheel. So it might sound new, it might sound scary, it might sound different than what a person has, but there is a really well-backed community there to support you.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's so important to call out. Just, the community continues to grow. And so the investment there is a safe one. Um, Eric, we have a question here about customer authentication. And I'm curious, was customer authentication migrated from Salesforce Commerce Cloud? If so, what was that approach?
So we haven't migrated that yet. That's where I was talking about Slash, where we're now trying to figure that out as we do tackle the PLP and PDP. So it's it's a bit more involved than we hoped, but it's coming along luckily. So
And I love this question. How does your ecom team handle ownership of tools and platforms that increased with composable architecture, such as CMS, personalization, search provider platforms?
so it's interesting where we've now, since we've enabled so many of our developers to really do what they're good at, um, we essentially have a subject matter expert in just about every part of our tech stack. But then also with that availability, people are a lot more flexible in terms of jumping into actually writing front end code or making that small tweak in the CMS to get that thing out. So it's become a bit more dynamic in that sense, where the tooling is no longer as scary as it was, and a much more open platform. So we're able to be a bit more, I guess, collaborative in terms of how people get work out.
Yeah, so it sounds like breaking down some of those silos between, these teams owning each part of the process and working better together.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I love that. That brings us to the end. I wanted to give a big thanks to Eric for joining us today. And thank you to Dan, as always, for your expertise. And thank you for all of you for showing up today from all over the world and for joining us on our conversation. And again, if you're in New York City, please come and say hello to us at the NRF booth or anywhere at the event. And if you have any other questions, feel free to connect with us directly, either on LinkedIn or LinkedIn or Slack. We'd love to continue the conversation. But we'll see you all next time. Thanks again.